Now, the answer to the latter question is truly fascinating because the silver supply squeeze of the 1980s gives us a sense of how high Bitcoin could go if it experiences a supply squeeze of its own. The reason why this is so fascinating is because prior to the supply squeeze, silver followed a regular cycle of its own. As you can see, silver had a 6-year cycle throughout the 1960s and 70s. You'll notice that there were 3 cycles in total, and that the third time silver retested that long-term resistance trend line, it went parabolic. As you might have guessed, that parabolic move was driven by a silver squeeze. If you look at Bitcoin, you'll notice that there have also been 3 cycles in the 2010s and 2020s. The difference is that these cycles are 4 years instead of 6 years. The similarity is that Bitcoin is likewise retesting a long-term resistance trend line, and this is effectively happening at the time of making this video. At first glance, you might think, hey, history is unlikely to repeat, and that it's unlikely that Bitcoin will go parabolic if it manages to break above this long-term trend line. Upon closer inspection, however, you realize that this is more likely than meets the eye, and not just because of the similarities in supply. As we've learned, many consider Bitcoin to be a digital gold with a higher volatility. In practical terms, this means that they see Bitcoin as a higher risk, higher reward bet on gold. What was that historically? That's right, silver. So, even though Bitcoin's narrative is digital gold, investors treat it more like a digital silver. To put things into perspective, silver pumped by more than 4 times after it broke above that long-term resistance trend line in its third cycle, thanks to the supply crunch. But before you get too excited, it's important to note that silver's market cap back then was much smaller than Bitcoin's is today. Based on our research, silver's market cap was roughly $1 trillion in 2025 dollars before it went parabolic, meaning its market cap grew from $1 trillion to $4 trillion. If we assume that Bitcoin follows silver in market cap, then a $4 trillion market cap would translate to a Bitcoin price of somewhere around $200,000. There are just 2 important things to note, however. The first is that this assumes that Bitcoin experiences a supply crunch, which is by no means guaranteed. The second is that investors are likely to take profits ahead of 200K, and that's just because it's another key psychological level, meaning Bitcoin could top somewhere around 180K. Conversely, whales could push Bitcoin's price above 200K to suck in investors looking for that 300K plus level. And this brings me to the question of how a Bitcoin supply squeeze could affect the broader crypto market.